Much of what has been said about communism in this country is simply not true.
Marxism-Leninism is a system of scientific opinions and theories which were built by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and defended and developed by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Marxism-Leninism was formed and developed by interpreting reality, as well as building on preceding ideas. It provides the fundamental worldview and methodology of scientific awareness and revolutionary practice. It is a science that concerns the work of liberating the proletariat from all exploitative regimes, with the ambition of liberating all of humanity from all forms of oppression.
Welcome to Weeb Revolution. I'm Andre. In this video, I wanted to compile a list of books, authors, YouTubers, podcasts, and websites that will help you on your path to learning about Marxist-Leninist theory and history. This video will attempt to be as comprehensive as possible. However, there is a certain limit to that since I have not read every book in the world. However, I do think this video at least offers a solid jumping off point for further study. With that out of the way, let's start with the portion of the video that recommends websites and online tools. If you are a frequent Discord user, then I highly encourage you to make a private server for yourself and turn it into a study center of sorts. Using my own private server as an example, it's a place where I post screenshots and notes from my readings, it's where I keep my reading list along with full PDFs of books, it's where I save film links or keep track of helpful YouTube videos. If you're easily distracted by Discord, it may not be the most helpful tool for guiding your study, but it does at least serve as a handy place to store things for later. Now, if you want to be a proper communist, you're absolutely going to need to access all kinds of books. If you don't want to use Amazon to buy physical copies, then I suggest thrift books. Of course, you should support your local bookstores, secondhand bookshops, and familiarize yourself with the libraries near you. But because some of these topics are a bit niche, they may not have everything you're looking for. If you are a Kindle user, then you won't be able to avoid sending money to Amazon. Something I lament because Kindle does have really handy highlighting tools and options for adjusting the text. But if you are a digital reader, then I at least suggest getting familiar with EPUB Reader. I use the free mobile app on my phone and it's been pretty helpful. This leads into one of my favorite websites ever, Anna's Archive, where you can download from a massive library of books for free. Absolutely use it if you can find a free PDF on Internet Archive or just through a regular internet search. Marxist Internet Archive, although suffering from outdated web design, is full of essential Marxist readings. Also, it is a Trotskyist website, so I definitely don't endorse the things they say, but still, it's a helpful tool. Red Star Publishers has a wide range of texts available for free as well, although their website design suffers from the same problem as Marxist Internet Archive. Keep note of them because it's there where I found my copy of Anna Louise Strong's The Soviets Expected It. There's Iskra Books, which is a great place to order physical copies of classic Marxist readings too. Additionally, it is their policy to have free PDFs of all of their books available on their website. Definitely remember them because it's where you can read the official translation of Domenico Lasordo's Stalin, History and Critique of a Black Legend. And finally, I would like to close off this section of the website recommendations by highly recommending Lady Izdihar's website. Specifically, her Soviet Archive section, which is full of old documents that have been scanned and uploaded for free access. Now, those websites are just places for getting access to readings, whether physical or digital. You're not going to find a second use for them besides that. The following doubles as a depository for texts, and a place to directly search knowledge related to Marxist theory and history. PearlWiki is a collaborative, wiki, by many Marxist-Leninists from around the globe. A little bit like Wikipedia, but without the liberalism or the begging for money. Like Wikipedia, you can search up any kind of topic you're interested in. A country, a historical event, a leader, or a more general topic such as democracy, what petit bourgeois means, etc. The site is good for focused searches to see a Marxist perspective on a specific issue, to quickly look up a basic concept you wanted a refresher on, or even if you're bored and are just in the mood for a rabbit hole dive. Their portals are helpful as well if you want a little more structure in your searches. Another major aspect of PearlWiki is their library. Although not every page in the library is perfectly formatted, Triumph of Evil's page unfortunately has that problem, it is incredible how many texts and books it hosts. You can find the major theoretical writers of Marxism here, of course, along with communist, socialist, and left-wing authors and theorists. The way their sections are organized is extremely helpful as well. Want to read about the German Democratic Republic? Check out their library portal for that. Want to read about queer liberation from a Marxist perspective? Check out their library portal for that. There's a variety of compiled readings too at the top of the library page, such as a guide to organizing, an absolute beginner's list, and even an English translation of the 1988 book, The CIA's Shining Path. a very interesting read if you have the time. Definitely bookmark their absolute beginner's list for an intro to theory. How Marxism works and the elementary principles of philosophy in particular are fantastic for teaching newcomers. Another place that offers a great number of suggested readings and resources is ML Reading Hub. They have their own beginner's reading list as well. Perhaps you may want to follow their list instead of the one on ProWiki, that's fine, but what's important is that you actually do the reading. Please, please, please familiarize yourself with these texts in a way that's approachable for you. If you're an individual student, that's cool. If you need someone to keep you focused and make a study group of friends, so long as you actually strive to learn, then you're on the right path. For other websites that offer articles and essays written by Marxist-Leninists, there's the Red Clarion. I highly recommend their 2023 article, Debunking 10 Common Misconceptions of Communism. There's redsales.org. Their articles, Tankies and Concessions, are two of my favorites from them, and good for people who are new to all of this. But as with the other websites in this section, it's nice to simply browse around and read other stuff on there that interests you. Following reading list consists of 11 books that I think you should tackle in order. They are helpful for 3 specific reasons: deprogramming people from capitalist indoctrination, instilling anti-imperialist ideas, and learning Marxist-Leninist concepts. However, it must be noted that none of these books are a replacement for reading Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc. As I mentioned before, there are theory guides out there that offer a ton of help in choosing which Marxist texts to approach first and in what order. This list has more of a focus on history. Please also note that I have read these books in full. So unlike some of the ones later on in the video, I have full confidence in recommending all 11 of them.
Communism, ladies and gentlemen, I say it without flinching, communism in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba brought land reform and human services, a dramatic bettering of the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or never since witnessed in human history. And that's something to appreciate. Communism transformed desperately poor countries into societies in which everyone had adequate food, shelter, medical care, and education. And some of us who come from poor families, who carry around the hidden injuries of class, are very impressed by these achievements and are not willing to dismiss them as economistic. To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people.
Recommendation 1. Black Shirts and Reds, Rational Fascism and the Overthrow of Communism by Michael Parenti. This book was written in 1997 by the American historian and political scientist Michael Parenti. I think for any Westerner who's trying to unlearn capitalist narratives of history, Black Shirts and Reds represents a great starting point. It teaches one about the successes and failures of previous socialist experiments. It teaches one about fascism as a capitalist mode of production, the consequences of the fall of the USSR and the Eastern Bloc, and even offers brief lessons on Marxism as a science to use in the modern day. While I will concede that the length of the book does not allow Parenti to fully flesh out some of his arguments, it is simultaneously a benefit. It's a fantastic beginning place for anyone who wants to start learning because it's not too long of a book. Parenti's strong writing ability also makes picking up and reading the book a comfortable experience. Please note that his criticisms about socialist countries like China, Cuba, Vietnam, and Laos were important at the time. One may jump at the chance to lob hindsight at Parenti and show the accomplishments of modern China under the leadership of President Xi, but he couldn't predict the future. The consensus of Marxists towards the market reforms in these countries tended to be much more skeptical than hopeful, and the contradictions that emerged in the face of these reforms, such as lowered working standards, dismantling of parts of the welfare systems, and increased misery, were real. Later text in this list will also address those contradictions. Recommendation 2. The Triumph of Evil, The Reality of the USA's Cold War Victory by Austin Murphy. Okay, big negative out of the way, there is something wrong with the formatting of this book and the most widely circulated PDF of it that I found online. Sometimes pages repeat in the PDF, sometimes it skips ahead and rounds back. I don't know what's up with that. That may be an issue in older versions of the book, one that the PDF is scanned from. It's not an issue in the physical copy that I got from Thrift Books, but if you do try to read the book online, just keep track of your pages because you will get confused. With the formatting issues in mind, The Triumph of Evil is spectacular. The author, Austin Murphy, has a doctorate in finance and taught investment as a professor, so he was not a lifelong communist. evident by the funny yet frustrating suggestion he makes at the end of the book that the United States vote against capitalism. However, Murphy's intellectual background and status as a previously indoctrinated USA American makes The Triumph of Evil a very useful and compelling book because it's written by someone who used to believe capitalist falsehoods, but has strived to debunk them and argue for socialism instead. I think the best chapters of the book are actually the introduction and chapter 1. This is because the introduction is committed to laying out all of the people the United States has killed both domestically and abroad. Up to the year 2000, of course. This predates 9/11 and the War on Terror. Chapter 1, meanwhile, focuses on debunking major anti-communist myths, and even debunking arguments about the superiority of capitalism in terms of economic efficiency. A lot of it is addressed by Murphy, and it is incredible to see someone have the courage to tackle these topics and add so much historical context and nuance. Here's a picture of the table of contents so you can see what each chapter is about. The only chapter I wasn't fond of was chapter 5, since I couldn't really absorb the more complex financial information Murphy tries to convey. But the conclusion to the book is pretty good, and so are all the other chapters, even if the conclusion also includes Murphy's aforementioned suggestion for people to defeat capitalism in the ballot box. Oh gosh. Recommendation 3. Why the World Needs China. Development, Environmentalism, Conflict Resolution, and Common Prosperity, by Kyle Ferrana. This book is a must-read because it talks about developments in the contemporary world and what role the People's Republic of China plays in it. The author stresses in the introduction that by the time one reads the book, it may become a little dated, given that developments in China and globally have likely already rapidly changed since then, something that was proven true by the new US trade war initiated in 2025. Regardless, this book still gives the reader a rich amount of information, from everything to the transition from the colonial era to the super-imperialist era of today, to internal developments in China with questions over who wields state power and what accomplishments China has had domestically, China's relationship with the world system and countries in the periphery. The chapter that stood out to me the most was Chapter 9, which is a comparative analysis between the conditions of the Uyghur population in southern Xinjiang versus the conditions of the Navajo Nation in the United States. Like The Triumph of Evil's second chapter, which compares East and West Germany, Chapter 9 of Why the World Needs China makes a brilliant case for socialism as the superior system in terms of both efficiency and how it centers human development. The democracy versus authoritarianism dichotomy is perhaps the most tortured and illogical iteration of international relations theory, even though it is the one most favored by the Western press. The idea of democracy is an inspiring and appealing one, yet such approval is not confined to the West. Surveys by the Latana Democracy Perception Index report indicate that over 3/4 of people in China and Vietnam, two countries considered the most authoritarian in the world by the Western press, considered their own country to be democratic, while less than half in the United States, supposedly the leader of the democratic world, believed the same. In contrast, it is difficult to imagine authoritarianism as a coherent ideology, or indeed as anything besides a crude label the press might affix to an other whose actual beliefs and motivations it does not care to try to understand or illuminate. Recommendation 4. Atrocity Fabrication and Its Consequences. How Fake News Shapes World Order, by A.B. Abrams. After having read this last year, it has very quickly become one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. Abrams goes through 11 chapters worth of examples of the United States and the capitalist West fabricating atrocities done by enemy or rival countries in an attempt to destroy their reputation, cut them off from the world, and in the most extreme cases, militarily attack them under the guise of humanitarian intervention. This is not an easy book to read. It's long, and the subject matter it covers is extremely violent and graphic at many points. However, this book is also one of the most important books on this list. Not only is it helpful for learning about past conflicts in further detail, it's essential for learning about more current conflicts the United States has been stoking. When you walk away from Abrams' book, you'll have a much clearer understanding of how atrocity propaganda, whether against socialist nations or even just rival capitalist nations, is spread throughout the Western world and how the accompanying meta-narratives distort global opinion. Observing the prisoner's eventual return, Winnington and Burchett emphasized the stark contrast to the well-treated Western prisoners coming out of Chinese and Korean camps, describing prisoners released from Western camps as follows: haggard, with faces dank and moist like corpses, bearing the hideous mutilations of experimental surgery. Some Vankatide, girls driven mad by attempted essay. Half of the prisoners in many ambulances were lacking legs, often both legs. Even men missing 2 legs and without artificial ones were not treated by the Americans as stretcher cases, so plentiful were amputees. In a single hour, it was possible to see 6 people delivered who lacked all 4 limbs, hacked back to mere torsos. If Chinese or North Korean media had had anything near the influence of that of the West, it is likely that the treatment of their prisoners in the custody of the US and its allies would have been recorded in history as one of the great atrocities of the 20th century. As it was, the 2 East Asian states were too isolated and vilified and lacked the media clout needed to propagate their narratives or make their grievances known. Recommendation 5 and 5.5, What About Russia? An honest reply to honest questions, plus The Stalin Era, both by Anna Louise Strong. This is fudging the lines somewhat since the first one is a pamphlet and the second one is a book, but I think they pair really well together. Anyway, Anna Louise Strong was an American journalist who spent years living in the USSR, took many trips to the People's Republic of China, and even visited the North Korean area prior to the start of the Korean War. While Anna Louise Strong does have a rich library of texts to choose from, one of my favorites being When Serfs Stood Up in Tibet, where she describes the process of the liberation of Tibet, I chose these works because they relate to the USSR. And the reason these works are so important is because she enters the USSR with an American perspective, and through her experiences, she sees all the good and bad of the country. She doesn't shy away from criticizing the country or its leaders, but she also doesn't feel the need to ignore the incredible things the country has done, often defending them in the face of anti-communist propaganda and narratives from the West. In fact, she finds herself swept up in the revolutionary optimism of the time and can truly convey the triumphs of the Soviet attempt at socialism. What About Russia is a pamphlet that answers questions that Strong received about the Soviet Union. It's short, but it does a lot to dispel a ton of myths all at once. The Stalin Era, meanwhile, is about, well, the Stalin Era in the Soviet Union. Strong begins with the Russian Civil War and goes up to the early years of Khrushchev's administration. The book does a lot to dispel a ton of myths about this era of the Soviet Union and even about Stalin himself. The Stalin Era is up there with Atrocity Fabrication in terms of my favorite books that I've read in recent memory. No country is ruled by one man. This assumption is a favorite red herring to disguise the real rule. Power resides in the ownership of the means of production, by private capitalists in Italy, Germany, America, by all productive workers jointly in the USSR. This is the real difference that today divides the world into 2 systems, in respect to the ultimate location of power. Since liberals treat class rule as a figure of speech, let us note how it functions. The chief task of government in capitalist countries is regulation of relations between various private owners and the protection of their properties from encroachments by the working class. Recent history in Germany, Italy, and America shows varying methods used to attain this goal. In the USSR, the chief task of government is the management and improvement of the jointly owned properties of the country and the building of a good life thereon for the joint owners. I was originally going to cover the next 6 books in this list more in depth, but for the sake of your time, I'll go over them briefly. Recommendation 6 is If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution by Vincent Bevins. Bevins is very well known for his book The Jakarta Method, but If We Burn is about modern protest movements and him analyzing how they succeed and how they fail. The book ultimately argues in favor of disciplined Leninist tactics over more horizontally managed anarchist tactics. Recommendation 7 is Racism and Human Survival, Lessons of Nazi Germany for Today's World by Claude M. Lightfoot. Lightfoot was a black communist from the United States who traveled to the 2 Germanys to analyze how both countries dealt with their legacy of racism. His ultimate conclusion is that East Germany, thanks to its socialist system, was able to much more effectively eradicate the racism in their society compared to West Germany. The book does cover more topics such as the prelude to World War II, some German history, as well as what Lightfoot was dealing in the contemporary era with the Vietnam War, the arrest of Angela Davis by the Nixon regime, and apartheid South Africa. And while there is a very bittersweet feeling when you remember that the GDR is no longer with us, Lightfoot's book carries a lot of hope because it shows that socialism can, in fact, improve the character of human beings. Recommendation 8. Socialism Betrayed: Behind the Collapse of the Soviet Union by Roger Caron and Thomas Kenny. Compared to Lightfoot's book, this book is much more critical of socialist experiments, specifically the Soviet Union, because, as the title suggests, it goes through the reasons behind the collapse of the USSR. There's not much else to say here other than that there is a lot to learn from this book, and that's why it's on this list. Recommendation 9. Class Struggle: A Political and Philosophical History by Domenico Losordo. While I don't think this book is the longest on this list, it is certainly the hardest to read, if only because Losordo was a rather dense writer, so he can be a little hard to follow at times. However, this book is still very important. The book looks at the history of class struggle from Marx's day to the modern day and compares how Marxism and populism have been in conflict with one another and how sometimes populism has distorted the image of Marxism to create a sort of crude egalitarianism. That's the most I can say about the book. I learned a lot from it, but it covers so many topics that it would just waste your time to go over them. Recommendation 10. The CIA as Organized Crime: How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World by Douglas Valentine. This book details the history of the Central Intelligence Agency and its involvement in international drug trade, internal suppression domestically, and covert action against enemy countries, whether they be socialist or not. I don't want to undersell this book because it is excellent, but it covers so many topics that it's really hard to summarize it as well. I'll also add that this book is extremely long, so if you're worried about finishing it, I highly recommend you to find the audiobook version and listen to that. Recommendation 11. Socialism with Chinese Characteristics: A Guide for Foreigners by Roland Bohr. As the title suggests, this book was written for Western audiences to teach them about Chinese socialism. And the focus of all of that should be obvious enough: Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, the socialist market economy, etc. And while this book is accessible and well written, it's also very dense with theory, making it one of the harder books to read on this list. Don't let that dissuade you though. This is an invaluable tool for learning and an excellent book. The following list of books is not exhaustive, and I haven't had a chance to read all of them. However, I have included them due to a combination of factors, such as some familiarity, subject matter, and recommendations from others. I've tried to sort by topic and place. I'm also sorry if books on a particular country, such as the often ignored Lao, doesn't appear here. If you want to find something specific that I didn't mention here, well, that's what the ProWiki Library's categories are for. I won't be reading the names out, so feel free to take screenshots. The USSR, the German Democratic Republic, plus the Federal Republic of Germany, China, the DPRK, Palestine, Indigenous American Genocide, Colonialism and Imperialism, books about Western intelligence or anti-communist subversion, gender liberation, black liberation both within the US and abroad, books that are about socialism in practice, and a miscellaneous section. For this section, I would like to highlight a few specific people that you should consider checking out, whether for their written works, or even just for lectures or videos that feature them. Michael Parenti is an obvious one. The Parenti Library on YouTube has many of his lectures uploaded, and of course he's written a plethora of books. I've already recommended 3 of A.B. Abrams' books so far, but that's only because he's a stellar author who offers fantastic anti-Western perspectives on global topics. His other books include World War in Syria, China and America's Tech War, and Power and Primacy. Domenico Losordo has many great books aside from just class struggle. Earlier I mentioned his Stalin book, which is stellar, but I also highly recommend pretty much anything else he's written, from his book on Western Marxism, to his book on the history of nonviolent resistance, and anything else of his that catches your eye. Absolutely check out books by Albert Szymanski. He was a Marxist-Leninist sociologist who wrote about a variety of topics, but you may know him from his book, Human Rights in the Soviet Union. His books are older and come from a radical niche, so you aren't going to come by physical copies easily. Thankfully, Internet Archive and Anna's Archive have some free digital copies of his written work available. Definitely check out is The Red Flag Flying, which I mentioned earlier, Class Struggle in Socialist Poland, and a critique of ultraleftism, dogmatism, and sectarianism. And finally, I highly recommend Leslie Feinberg. Feinberg was a Marxist-Leninist from the United States who connected queer liberation to the Marxist tradition. Their writings and speeches are invaluable. A few of the latter are on YouTube. You can find easy links to a small sampling of their works on the ProWiki Library page as well. Before I talk about YouTube channels in a broader sense, I would like to recommend 2 playlists and an assortment of specific videos you should jot down for later. For playlists, definitely keep in mind the saved re-uploads from Endymion Torvarshi. Although his original account is gone, his archived videos are great intros to Marxism and the history of socialist countries. There's also a full playlist of a YouTube course on socialism with Chinese characteristics. The channel's tag is @WCC Lectures 2031. It's a very long series, but please check it out. For standalone stuff, there's the Empire Files video, Anti-Communism, America's Unofficial Religion, a great 30-minute video detailing American repression of communists and the anti-capitalist left. Revolutionary Thoughts' videos, Undoing Your Capitalist Conditioning and Everything Wrong with the Political Compass, are both excellent if you're new to Marxism because they help you shift the way you think about the world. All while being pretty entertaining, so they're really easy to digest. Li Xiang's video, The West Bombed Democracy to Africa, China Brings Partnerships to Africa, is a great way of seeing an African perspective on the continent's history with colonialism. CGTN has a good mini-doc titled Is Marx Still Relevant? Although it's not meant to teach you about Marxism, it is useful for explaining Chinese culture's compatibility with Marxism and how Marxism is the foundation for China's modern prosperity. Let me be clear that I do not endorse everything said by the channels here. Just like how I don't endorse everything said by a previously recommended publisher, website, or author. However, all the channels that I do bring up are included because I view them as useful sources of information, and so you should at least keep tabs on them. To begin with, I strongly encourage everyone to follow Revolutionary Thought. They're a great video essayist who's covered a ton of topics. I recommended 2 of their videos earlier, but if you want something more focused on media analysis, check out their video on Miyazaki's Spirited Away. Don't worry, I didn't forget that Weeb Revolution is an anime channel too. They were also kind enough to provide some voice work for this video. Continue till the end for that. Link to their channel specifically will be in the description. Red Pen has solid primers on Marxist theory as well as a handful of other stuff. Dessalines uploads audiobook readings from various Marxist authors, from Parenti to Anna Louise Strong to Lasordo, to a decent number of the classics as well. Christy Mallory's library also uploads audiobooks of leftist texts, including some of the ones mentioned in this video. Please know that these are audiobooks narrated by a noticeably robotic text-to-speech program, so if that bothers you, the videos may not help you learn. However, human-read audiobooks for these types of niche texts are hard to come by, so it's helpful to have some type of option available for people who have trouble focusing on reading. Luna Oi is a Vietnamese YouTuber with a number of vlogs exploring the culture and politics of her country. She also has videos explaining Marxist concepts, videos about Vietnamese history, as well as a number of other topics. She also translated the previously mentioned Marxist-Leninist textbook from Vietnam. Lady Izdahar, whose website of archives I mentioned previously, is a communist YouTuber who mostly talks about the 1920s to 1960s era of the USSR. Although she has a great swath of videos and shorts that cover all sorts of topics, from Soviet fashion to Soviet culture and history. And finally, Eyes Wide Open is a channel that talks about the history of the CIA. This channel's content is particularly good because although the creator isn't a Marxist, he still heavily cites his sources and research in the videos. For the podcast section, I would like to start by recommending ProsPod, formerly known as Pros on the Round Table. I recommend their episode on the subversion of East Germany, their 2-parter on the history of Ukrainian nationalism, and their huge multi-hour series on the Stalin era. Another excellent podcast is Actually Existing Socialism, created by one of the ProsPod hosts. AES focuses on talking to people who have either been to socialist countries, lived in them, or studied them. How the Red Was Won, another podcast in the ProsPod sphere, is a communist podcast with an emphasis on organizing in the American Deep South. But they talk about a variety of topics and have some theory readings up. The Red Nation is a podcast with a focus on Indigenous history, politics, and culture. Reading Capital of Comrades is an excellent resource because it's a good guide for helping you get through the first volume of Marx's Capital. Pick Me Up I'm Scared is also a communist podcast, although you wouldn't know by first glance. This one is a particular favorite of mine because the hosts do an excellent job at researching topics before talking about them, and they do so in a way that makes the history digestible, which is helped by their sense of humor since the topics do get pretty depressing. I recommend their 3-part series on American propaganda, their 3-part series on the Haitian Revolution, and their 2-part series on Tibet. And finally, I recommend Upstream. It's an anti-capitalist podcast that has had on a variety of great left-wing guests like Vijay Prasad, Gabriel Rockwell, Jason Hickel, etc. I wasn't originally going to recommend films, but I was encouraged to at least put in a few. Here they are. I'm not going to make this section very long either because it's of minor importance in a video meant to share resources and guides and stuff, especially since we already have 2 videos on this channel recommending leftist anime. However, please do watch Mobile Suit Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. It is the most communist of all the Gundams, and because of that, it's also my favorite. It's also really gay, too. Now, before I end this video, let me say this. Practice is essential. Study and learn as much as you can and encourage others to do so too. But you have to organize in the real world, apply what you learn, and learn from your practice. Please do not study only to spend the rest of your time online arguing with strangers. That is not productive and it's not helpful. Get involved in a nearby Marxist organization. If there isn't one, try to make your own, or try to find another avenue for change. A better world is possible, but you have to go out there and make that happen. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and now a very quick reading from Revolutionary Thought.
Marxism-Leninism is an ideology, a method of investigation to understand the world, the laws according to which it moves, so you can orient yourself in the world. We communists are materialists. We follow a scientific outlook which assumes that the society and everything that arises in it are the work of human beings. Exploitation and oppression are neither divinely ordained, nor are these evils acceptable. We have to fight for a humane, fair, peaceful world, and today that is more urgent than ever. We must refuse to allow that people perish from war, hunger, and disease, and that natural resources and the livelihood of the people be depleted or destroyed by ruthless capitalist exploitation solely for profit. If humanity is to have a future, the power of the banks and corporations must be broken. They will not give up their power voluntarily.